In the heart of Appalachia, North Carolina, Burke County has long faced a culture of extraction. Jobs leaving, resources draining, communities hollowed out. Since 2015, the Industrial Commons, a local nonprofit, has been fighting back, building a network of cooperative businesses, workforce programs, and circular textile enterprises rooted in local wealth. And now they're breaking ground on something even bigger. Today, I sit down with the systems thinker behind the strategy, Steven Baumgartner, founder of Baumgartner Urban Systems Strategy, or BOOS. After 2 decades at global design and engineering firms, Steven has contributed to significant urban development projects from New York to Abu Dhabi. In today's episode, Steven and I draw a juxtaposition to many city building efforts and the thoughtful approach the Industrial Commons is taking to translate their mission into a place, one that serves a community long left behind by extractive industry, and why investing in local economies through place-based solutions matters now more than ever. I'm Kate Gasparo, and this is Building Better Cities. I am always curious when I meet somebody who is I like to call us like hired guns in the industry, and how you've made the transition from a corporate approach to city building to a hired gun approach. And maybe if you just like talk us through your evolution and why you think this is the best place for your specific and unique set of skills.
Yeah, it's been a crazy ride. And I talk to a lot of young people and other folks in the industry who are trying to figure out their path. And when I present mine, it's not really something that I could ever give as a model. But I would say that I've learned a ton by working at a lot of really excellent firms around the country. Big, diverse engineering, consulting firms that have breadth of disciplines and of project types and sitting in the middle of complex teams solving complex problems. And that is invaluable if you're trying to understand systems, understand approaches, and just perspective on the world. I moved to Pittsburgh about 10 years ago, and in that transition, realized that the skill set I had with big firms, being a kind of conductor, being a kind of, system thinker, challenger, was a difficult thing to communicate to a lot of teams. Like, what is your value? Until they actually see it kind of unfold and see the process and see the outcomes. And I was always a little anxious about what it would mean to leave that foundation of large firms to be this hired gun, this sort of, I'm a single person consultancy. I'd call myself a single person collaborative. I've been so lucky and so blessed that I've found an amazing set of projects, collaborators, value aligned projects where I can get into the mix, help shape the conversation, shape the approaches, shape the teams, and stay true to my core beliefs while really complimenting my clients.
I like how you label yourself a systems thinker. Is there a different label you used earlier in your career?
I've had a few dozen. I'm a proud engineer, proud PE. I have never backed away from calling myself an engineer. I also do a lot of strategy, vision planning. So I do love calling myself a strategist. I also do a ton of work in what you would call planning. I am not an urban planner by background or training, but I've done so much work around really unbelievable campus, city, community planners that I've got a muscle memory and I think a really good set of processes and protocols and tools that I feel very comfortable calling myself a planner. My name, Urban Systems Strategy. Like I take real pride in urban. I take real pride in strategy, building system solutions and doing it with and for people. And I really love being technical and remembering that I am an engineer and I like engineering problems.
In terms of systems thinking, if listeners are new to this concept, can you give us a few examples of how systems thinking comes forth in city planning?
Yeah, it's really hard. And this is something I talked to my mom about because I'm trying to communicate to her what I do. Maybe this podcast will help. It's really quite fascinating that our industry, let's call it the design construction industry, really finds boundaries in which to do their work. Architects are given a boundary. engineers are giving a boundary, construction firms are giving boundaries, and they are trying to optimize that boundary for a building, for an infrastructure system, for a bridge, for some sort of element that affects our built environment, a park, whatever it may be. There is so little incentive for people to think beyond the boundary into the stuff that flows in and out of those boundaries. And these are systems that we are impacting by recommending as designers and planners a intervention. And if anybody proposes an intervention to that system without understanding the full system, right, then you're doing it an injustice. So a systems thinker steps back, eliminates the boundaries, thinks about the whole thing to the best that they can, and then they inform that recommendation back into the boundary based on the perspective. That's really, I think, that's my definition. I think I've always been pretty good at allowing the teams that I work with to break down those boundaries, and I encourage them to think at system scale before they come back to a recommendation.
And since you've worked at scale on districts and cities throughout the country and also in other countries pushing forward their city building strategies, what core principles do you think should be shaping this next era of city building?
So I think there's two sides to that. So one side is the values that I hold as an individual and as a practitioner. I've had actually a lot of advice when I was standing up my practice. Some of the best advice that I received was write down your principles, your core values, your why, and live by them. And I really took that to heart. And I'm very clear that my three core values are human-centered. I'm building system solutions for and around the people that they serve. The second is decentralized, how to break down these really heavy urban systems to a scale where people can see them, intervene with them, interact with them. And then value-based, building systems and solutions that are anchored in the values that these clients and these individuals hold. So human-centered, decentralized, and value-based. I work on so many diverse projects, but they all have a strong combination and maybe different mix of those three core values. And I'm very proud of that. The other is my clients, right? And I think it's such an interesting thing to try to really understand and articulate and even really be very clear and write down the values that we're trying to adhere to when we advance projects. So really what I always really try to start with is again, literally writing down the values that we're taking forward in the projects that we're working on.
What are some of the trends you're seeing in terms of values from the projects that you're working on and the clients that you work for? Do you see that there are trends, or do you see that everyone is pretty unique in how they're approaching this and it's very context specific to place?
I try to push really hard to make them specific to place. There are, as you know, so many third-party frameworks out there, and I think that some of them do it better and others at landing in place. But I think for the most part, they're pretty generic to place. I have tried really hard, even building on third-party frameworks, but also building bespoke frameworks to really anchor these what I call value-based frameworks to the individuals, to the clients. And it's really served me and my clients very well by building a very clear trail of breadcrumbs from investment back to value. It's so important. And you asked about trends. I would say these projects are flashing in front of my eyes. I think the trends really are about realizing that the world is changing so quickly that the entities that were the most authentic in their core values are realizing that they are creating more resiliency within their entities, if that makes sense. The ones that had just kind of went through the motions, did some third-party frameworks, checked some boxes, and I've worked for a handful of these as well. They're realizing that those sort of loose values that they put forward aren't enduring. And that is that they're sort of breaking off. Some of the stuff that they thought they committed to in 2000, 2010, 2020 are now not relevant anymore to them, and they're shifting.
So, when one of these clients, partners comes to you and have either gone through this values exercise or they're in the process of establishing what the values or principles are of their own development, what are they asking for you to do? Because you have a specific set of skills as a systems thinker. You've worked a lot in circular economy, shared infrastructure, regenerative design. When they come to you and they say, "Oh, I'm looking for somebody who's an expert in circular economy. Come help me." Or if they're looking for somebody who's really smart, has a lot of experience, and they're willing to learn alongside you.
I have a variety of different projects and project types, but I would say that all of them have some consistent application of two major worlds. One is technical and the other is sort of strategic, right? So in the technical world, I help clients think about system solutions in energy, in water, transportation where I can, although I'm not a transportation engineer, I work alongside a lot of great ones, and help to apply systems thinking to approaches, to developments, to campuses, to communities, and even cities and megacities now. The other side of that coin is strategy. So as we've talked about, entities take their vision, take their values, whether it be a company, a community, an institution, and apply those values to place. And I build frameworks and I build processes to allow them to do that.
Mm.
And I would say all the projects that I'm working on have a pretty balanced technical and strategy outcome.
I would love to take these concepts and sort of bring it down to a granular level. So we had talked previously about the industrial commons as a project that you've been working on that's been integrating some of these systems thinking concepts and the technical and strategic parts of development into one specific project. So could you, for listeners who are not familiar, talk about what the industrial commons is and what problem it was originally designed to solve for in North Carolina?
I'm so glad we get to talk about the industrial commons. I've been working for them for about 5, maybe 6 years. They're a nonprofit in Morganton, North Carolina, in Appalachia, Burke County. They saw this unbelievable sort of disinvestment in the region, primarily around vulnerable communities in Burke County, much of which are centered around sort of lack of jobs, lack of economic development, and also, to use their term, really a kind of culture of extraction.
Mm.
That while jobs were being lost, there was just resources, jobs, people leaving the community. And they saw this opportunity to intervene, to build up networks and systems to anchor local wealth and do it around making things
Hmm.
like crafts and textiles. And it's grown and emerged and is still evolving, but they are now representing what I see as the greatest example in the country, maybe world, of true circular economy, where they're building local wealth, generational wealth, and doing it through upcycling textiles and building system solutions for keeping this sort of culture of extraction to culture of local generation. It's extraordinary.
How is it when a client decides, I want to move a mission from being programmatic based? I'm planning these convenings, I'm providing resources to support the mission, to a place based approach. What is that thread that ties from programmatic to place based?
Yeah, that's exactly what they were going through, right? I have worked for, again, dozens and dozens of entities. None of them have been so clear in their vision and mission. And I would call them black belts in understanding who they are and how they engage with the community. But they've never built a campus, and they needed to translate their values, their core beliefs, their why into place. And they had some ideas. I mean, they've lived in the world, they've traveled a ton. They knew kind of what the kind of feel and vibe wanted to be, but they didn't really know how to turn their why into a place. And I was very lucky to be part of a great team early that helped shape what we called their vision plan. It took their core values and brought it to place. And that vision plan is still very present in all of their reasons for investment. I helped craft a team to design their full campus on roughly 40 acres in Morganton. And this first building of this campus is phase 1 of multiple phases. is breaking ground currently. And we're so psyched to have it be this first real place that can really exemplify who they are. And they needed this for a long time. The communities needed this. They're overperforming in the space that they have, but they need a place like this to allow them to grow and to reach more people in their community. So we're so excited about this first phase.
So I'm trying to understand, does that systems approach to the economy of the industrial commons extend to other types of systems around infrastructure, water, waste that you are interweaving with their economic system of industrial commons?
Yes, exactly. Right. This was a perfect example of them building a campus within roughly 40 acres and then a building within the campus within a local community right next to Morganton, Morganton within the county, right? These nested systems. We actually defined community in those nested systems for them early because they kept using the term community, but no one really quite knew what that meant. So we defined it. And then we did really what we talked about earlier, understood their specific place within the series of networks and systems. And those systems are socioeconomic, they are political, right? Which, we understood and built up, but really a lot of what we had to do was about connections, energy, materials, water, people flows, food flows. So being very intentional about understanding that this is action and recommendation and investment within a series of systems.
I would love if you maybe could use this first building that's breaking ground right now and talk about how values have been translated into architecture, infrastructure, programming of the space.
This first building is called the Accelerator Building. It's meant to incubate and accelerate different manufacturing companies and entities around textiles, textile upcycling that fit into this circular economy network that they are building. There is manufacturing, light manufacturing, sewing, repairs, different types of technologies for upcycling. Smart Wool is one of their collaborators. There's a lot of activities in here where traditionally the workers are in, dark, damp places. We really wanted to shift that into beautiful, connected, vibrant, light-filled, healthy areas that really blend indoor and outdoor. So there was a lot of intentionality about building frame, function, form around people and their wellness. So that was huge. But you can't talk about TIC without talking about materials and avoiding landfill with systems locally. So there was a lot of talk about lowered embodied carbon. We are advancing a mass timber solution. There was talk about zero waste to landfill. We are doing everything we can and aspiring to those goals. So nothing leaves site. If we can keep it on site, from earthwork to any waste, we are trying to keep everything on site and utilizing it. There's a really amazing story where after Hurricane Helene, fall, I believe September of 2024, unbelievable impact to the region. I was down there a couple of weeks after. It was really terrifying amounts of damage to the area. There was just so many felled trees, right? So the TIC went around with local entities, grabbed these trees and saved them. I don't know, maybe 20 of these really large trees. And now they are utilizing all those trees for all the woodwork, casing, the front door. So the first thing you touch is actually wood from the region. So there's an education aspect, there's circularity within it, but there's also just a real sense of touch and community and like local craft. I think that's really important, right? So instead of like big industry coming in and building a building, all of these little interventions are local to the best we can. They are rooted in individuals who have businesses and a moment to elevate the systems that they're living within. It's really awesome. We're trying the best with a very modest budget for a nonprofit to have every investment tie back to who they are and what they care about.
Do you find that I don't want to say opportunistic because it's not opportunistic. It's more like thought and practice. It's like melding the values with the practicality of delivering a building. Is it coming across as we're going to do this because it's part of the values that we have, or we have to do this because there's a constraint in place that's pushing us to do something different? And it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. I'm just curious, how much of this is opportunity driven? How much of it is constraint driven?
I try to start with ambitious, bold, elegant solutions and try not to be burdened early, especially in visioning and early strategy with constraints. I mean, that obviously there's stuff we need to think about within reason, but a constraint was we've never done mass timber in Morgan County or Burke County, or there's a lot of talk about geothermal and renewables and simple solutions that are happening all over the country and world that haven't landed here. So other groups may have been, well, let's not do that. It's going to be too hard to get done, or politically it might be an issue, whatever. I think part of the success of any project is putting those aside and sticking to solutions that you feel are really value aligned and are appropriate. Another key principle of TIC was replicability and scalability. This is a campus in a network, but they have all of these other nodes outside of Burke County and even internationally. And they really see this as an ability to scale. And we really thought of that in the planning process to in a lot of ways reduce those constraints, right? Or put the constraints on the side, because the constraints that might land here may not apply somewhere else. If we hold true to who we are and what we believe, that we can overcome those constraints, whether they be funding, political, regulatory. We can overcome them through transparency, through will, through hard work. So sometimes it comes back to bite you, and you realize that constraint was more real than you thought, like a local policy or regulation. But I think you do your clients a disservice if you focus too heavily on the constraints early in the planning process.
Maybe we can take one more example of how the opportunity of geothermal or water reuse is being thought about and ties directly back to TIC's, the Industrial Commons, values and goals with this campus.
I think we should talk about energy. Energy is a really good one. But before we do, I think it's important to mention two key third-party frameworks that were really helpful in shaping a lot of their thinking that we, as a planning and design team, introduced to TIC. One was sort of at community scale, was Just Communities, Eco Districts entity out of Atlanta-based group, Partnership for Southern Equity. Great entity, great group doing excellent work. And I really love Just Communities framework for applying to projects and processes like this. And the other, more at a building scale, was Living Building Challenge, and embracing that as a more toward the regenerative side of building and infrastructure than what we had talked about earlier, which is sort of the extraction side of our built environment. But energy and net zero energy was always a goal. And we really struggled with this as a goal, partly because they are in a community that is extremely low energy costs. The building was very passive, so we were able to reduce a lot of the demands. We're sure there's going to be some light industrial process loads, but this is an airy, open, relatively mild climate. And they are in a almost zero carbon grid. I think it's 95% nuclear. So it's very interesting, because what are we trying to solve for if you look at the system? But then a core principle was doing no harm to communities. And we can talk about nuclear and implications, but the implication of bringing solar on site, working with other collaborators and partners to reduce costs, PPAs and other grants and funding, but using it really as an educational tool that says, here's where we are in the system. Here's what energy means to us and the folks outside of the community. Here's why we decided to invest in on-site renewables, despite low cost and despite low carbon. That's been a really interesting thing to unpack and at the system scale. Solar discussion is reliability and risk, especially post Helene, and the role of commons, right? Industrial commons, the role of this place within the community. They certainly don't see it as a place of refuge for everyone to come in moments of disruption, but they absolutely see it being a hub for communication, for awareness, for community building in times of disruption and rebound. And that narrative is just massive. So the energy story, battery backup, became really hard to decouple from their brand. And I think that's a really good example of stepping back, looking at the system, and then landing in place tied to value.
That's really interesting. And I'm glad that we've been able to break down the material side because that is so core with the role and mission of the industrial commons. I want to now zoom out because you spoke a little bit that the industrial commons is being put together by a nonprofit. It's a 40-acre campus. I'm just trying to get scale in my head and a lot of the intentionality of this work. Is it something that anybody who's looking to develop at any scale can apply this intentionality, or there are elements of the 40 acres or that this is a nonprofit that lends itself more easily to being more intentional with every step of the development process?
I think there are ways to take the spirit of what TIC is doing and apply it in almost any other context. I mean, I think back to the core principles that I hold:
Mhm.
human-centered, decentralized, value aligned. Like I feel very strongly that if you bring those three things to projects at any scale, they will be better served and be more sustainable, more resilient, more equitable, for sure. I've lived that. But I think the TIC model is so special in that it is it you cannot decouple it from their place. It is so authentic to their place and it to the community, to the individuals who have spirit and soul like in that place, and the local environmental context and solutions that if you're going to apply some sort of set of principles that TIC has to maybe another community, if that it's back to your question, it has to be so authentic to place. And
Mm,
it can't just be climate aligned. It has to be to the people and to the history that these investments serve, right?
mm,
And what I think is their special sauce is they are the backbone entity that allows other groups to excel. I would call them a signal amplifier, right? They see the signal, they amplify it. They are a connector and they are a gap filler. They see gaps in with human networks, with physical material networks, and they fill them. And they fill them in a way where those two things can elevate each other. People make money and gain wealth, and you solve an environmental process or problem with a new process or a solution. And that is just so special. And you just don't see that very often. So I think, authenticity to place, like having a group like them that is that signal amplifier, that gap filler, and then you surround yourself with value aligned people that can think at systems and at system scale and make really good recommendations.
sometimes when we talk about values, it's the other side of the coin or the antithesis of that value that's driving the value. So when we're talking about like decentralization, human centric, values driven, part of me is thinking, okay, if he's calling these out, does that mean the status quo is the opposite of these values? And is that the basis of what's broken in how we're delivering cities and communities and districts and other parts of the country?
I really feel like I have a good view on teams and on how people are investing in our cities. And they are not talking enough to the people that these systems serve. They're just
Mhm.
intervening. They are certainly not looking at the whole system. They're just trying to solve within their boundary. I mean, I've worked at big firms and I have had my hand slapped several times for suggesting that we don't need that building or we don't need that new engineered system. I forget who said this, but one of my favorite quotes is the most common error of a smart engineer is to optimize something that should not exist. Because a lot of times we are doing that.
Mm,
We're optimizing a system that shouldn't be there. So
mm,
I'm trying to say, nope, bring it back to your community. I've talked about this sort of 15-minute city concept where you can kind of have access to all of your sort of amenities within a sort of 15-minute walk. And I like to apply that kind of 15-minute principle to other systems like energy and food. We should be thinking about these as 15-minute infrastructure systems where your energy and your water, your food can be sustained and be built within these sort of 15-minute networks. And instead of taking all of that generation or power generation or water treatment or material handling or food production and pushing it out to somewhere else, those are the infrastructures I think need to be replaced. And to me, it's so clear and so simple that if we break down those heavy infrastructures, we build systems around the people that they serve, and you do it with them in a value aligned way, we will have low, no carbon, resilient, sustainable, happier, and healthier communities.
One of my last questions is really around the enabling infrastructure. Like, what allows the nonprofit behind TIC to want to do better? And is it something about the organization itself? Are they hiring people in a way that builds a foundation for them to be better? I'm just trying to think, like, what is the linchpin that could be transferable to other organizations, other communities? What is the enabling component within the larger foundation of this project that could just make one more step towards a more human-centric, values-based approach for other places?
Not to duplicate the answer, but I do feel like that they are that backbone entity that can sit in a system and amplify. And how do you replicate that? Well, you have the leaders, their director, Molly and Aaron, who's helping to lead a bunch of businesses, but also shape this land of the commons. It's impossible to think about replicating them because they are doing such powerful work rooted in their place. Maybe the short answer is you take people who are extremely passionate and driven and are expert listeners, connectors, amplifiers, and put them around systems that need change and build the networks and the backbone in order to do that. And it's easier said than done, but I think, you can point to a bunch of others. I'm sure you know these people. I know these people outside of Molly and Aaron. They're doing the hard work of connecting and elevating. And it's really hard. I would say that I think TIC also has understood that they can learn from other places in the world and countries. So I think of them as a node that if they just got back from, I think, a couple of weeks in Spain, talking to other like-minded entities who are doing similar types of things, and they're sharing. And I love that as well, that this is a idea that they are a replicable connector at these different scales, right? I can just think about some of my other clients, collaborators, and I mean, I'm doing this right now, is just connecting them and getting those 30 juices flowing of potential. There is definitely some elements of this that can be translated, but it's finding the network to share and build that I think is so powerful.
Thanks for tuning in to Building Better Cities. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to hit subscribe so you never miss another episode. And if you could help spread the word by sharing with someone, it would mean so much to us. To learn more about our work, check out buildingbettercities.com. We're excited to keep the conversation going, so until next time, let's keep building better cities together.